Good evening and welcome to our Bible study. If you have your Bibles or devices, kindly turn with me to the book of Genesis, chapter 7 now. Genesis chapter 7, we're either in week 8 or week 9 in our study of the book of Genesis, the very first book. I want to begin this evening with something that I came across, something somebody wrote. It's anonymous, I think, but it's kind of humorous, and some of us would be able to relate to some of the things that are mentioned over here. It's about a conversation that God has with Noah in connection with building the ark. And the Lord said unto Noah, where is the ark which I have commanded thee to build? And Noah said unto the Lord, verily, I have had 3 carpenters of ill. The gopher-wood supplier hath let me down. Yea, even though the gopher-wood hath been on order for nigh upon 12 months. What can I do, O Lord? And God said unto Noah, I want that ark finished even after 7 days and 7 nights. And Noah said, it will be so, and it was not so. And the Lord said unto Noah, what seemeth to be the trouble this time? And Noah said unto the Lord, mine subcontractor hath gone bankrupt. The pitch which thou commandest me to put on the outside of the ark hath not arrived. The plumber hath gone on strike. Shem, my son, who hath helped me on the ark side of the business, had formed a pop group with his brothers Ham and Japheth. Lord, I am undone. And the Lord grew angry and said, what about the animals, the male and the female of every sort that I ordered to come unto thee to keep their seed upon the face of the earth? And Noah said, they have been delivered unto the wrong address, but should arriveth on Friday. And the Lord said, how about the unicorns and the fowls of the air by 7? And Noah wrung his hands and wept, saying, Lord, unicorns are a discontinued line. Thou canst not get them for love or money, and the fowls of the air are sold only in half dozens. Lord, Lord, thou knowest how it is. And the Lord in his wisdom said, Noah, my son, I knowest. Why else dost thou think I have caused a flood to descend upon the earth? And the Lord grew angry. I think that's quite a humorous and creative way of bringing about a lot of the problems that we have today, which is why many people have such great difficulty, such tremendous difficulty as taking the account of the global flood as literal, as a historical event. They find it very difficult to wrap their minds around the flood that is described in Genesis chapter 7, which we're going to look at today. So if you remember, God told Noah that he's going to send a flood, deluge, that will cover the entire earth. And so Noah begins to build this boat. It's actually basically a flotation device. It's not necessarily like a boat or a ship with a rudder and with a propeller and so on. So it's basically a flotation device. The measurements, the dimensions were provided by God himself, which ensured that this device, this barge, would be very, very stable. And many of the warships, many of the aircraft carriers, as I mentioned before, use pretty much the same dimensions. So when God said in Genesis chapter 6, verses 3, that my spirit will not strive with man forever, for he is flesh, his days will be 120. We know that the best interpretation of that verse is that God is saying, I will be patient for another 120 years, and then the judgment will begin, the floods will begin. So he says, I'll wait. Because of his long suffering, he'll wait, he'll be patient with man, and because of his wickedness, he will wait for another 120 years. Sometimes people think that Noah had 120 years. I've heard preachers talk about it like that. And it's a very simple mistake, and anybody can make it, that Noah had 120 years to build the ark. And I see why. I don't know, even last time I was saying he had many years, but God waited for 120 years before he brought the floods. But the reason why it couldn't have been that he had 120 years is because when Japheth was born. So when the floods came, sorry, let me start over. When Japheth, that is Noah's oldest son, was born, Noah was 500 years old. Now that is 100 years before the flood, because when the floods came in Genesis 7, we're going to see Noah was 600 years old. So his first son Japheth was born when Noah was 500 years old, and then his second son Shem, who is often mentioned first because he's first in order because of the importance and significance. Out of his race comes the Semitic race. So Shem was 98 years before the flood, because 2 years after the flood, Shem is 100 years old. So he's born 2 years after the flood. And Ham, if you take the same calculation, the youngest guy, take the same calculation, 2 years, then he would have been maybe 96 years old after the flood. So if they all grew up and let's say they got married, this is just an estimate, between 20 and 40 years, of age, this is Shem, Ham, and Japheth. They got married between 20 and 40. That gives Noah somewhere between 55 and 75 years to build the ark, because God gave him that instruction saying, take your sons and their wives, so they are married, and build this ark because I'm going to destroy everything on the earth. So it's not that Noah had 120 years to build the ark. That 120 refers to how long God is going to be patient with all of sinful mankind. So just a clarification to begin with. I'll begin by reading the first 5 verses of chapter 7. Then the Lord said to Noah, go into the ark, you and all your household, for I have seen that you are righteous before me in this generation. Take with you 7 pairs of all clean animals, the male and his mate, and a pair of the animals that are not clean, the male and his mate, and 7 pairs of the birds of the heavens, also male and female, to keep their offspring alive on the face of all the earth. For in 7 days I will send rain on the earth 40 days and 40 nights, and every living thing that I have made I will blot out from the face of the ground. And Noah did all that the Lord had commanded him. This first verse says, then God said to Noah, go into the ark. Depends which Bible translation you're reading. Because if you have a KJV before you or a NKJV, New King James, it will say come into the ark. I'm reading from my ESV, so it says go into the ark. If you have NIV, it will say go. This word, the Hebrew word, can be translated either way. It can be translated come, it can be translated go into the ark. In fact, the NASB, which is one of the most literal translations, says enter the ark. It can be translated enter the ark as well. So what is interesting is if the right translation is come in this context, come into the ark, then God was already in the ark and he's inviting Noah to come into the ark. And this would be the first time in the Bible where you have God making that invitation by saying, come into the ark. I don't know if it's come into the ark or go into the ark. It can be translated, like I said, either way. But if it is come, it is one of those many invitations that we find in scripture. For instance, one that I can think of is Isaiah chapter 1, verses 18, where God says, come, let us reason together. Though your sins are like scarlet, they will be made white as snow. Though they are red like crimson, they will be like wool. Or the very famous invitation of Jesus, I think in Matthew 11, where he says, come unto me all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Even at the end of the book of Revelation chapter 22, I think verses 7, the Spirit and the bride say, come, and whoever's thirsty can drink freely of the water, the living water. So that invitation where God calls us to come is replete throughout scripture. So maybe this says come, maybe that says go, but if it is come, then this is the first time in the Bible that invitation is given by God himself. Go into the ark, you and all your household, for I have seen that you are righteous before me in this generation. In this generation, I remember mentioning in the previous study that some people will estimate there were 750 million people on the earth. Some people say up to 1 billion people on the earth. There's Henry Morris. He's actually the founder of the Creation Research Institute. And he's an apologist. He was an engineer. He died in 2006, and he did a lot of research on Genesis. According to him, they're not just randomly coming up with these numbers. They do some calculations, they do some research. According to him, he says there were about 7.8 billion people on the earth before before the flood, the antediluvian period. Now there are about 8.1 billion people. So it's very close, according to him. We don't know what the exact figure was, but there would have been a lot of people because of the long lifespans. And also they would have been very healthy. So a lot of people. And in all these people, let's say the number was 1 billion. In all these people, only Noah and his family were righteous. And there's no need to clarify this, that they were righteous by their faith. Because if Noah did not have faith, then his whatever his so-called good acts are still tainted. They're still filthy rags, according to Isaiah. So he would have been righteous by faith. It's only because of his faith, anything good that he did in faith, and therefore it was considered as righteous. So God declares Noah and his household to be righteous, and he says, amongst all these people, you all have been righteous. So verses 2 and 3, he says, take with you 7 pairs. He gives him these instructions about taking all these different pairs. Some people think, and if you look at some of the pictures, especially in Sunday school books, there are 2 of each animal, sometimes in some bathtub, and many times, the picture, the way it's represented or depicted, or sometimes in the room walls in a children's room or in a nursery, you have the picture of Noah's Ark, and you have two of each animals, male and female. Makes a lot of sense. But over here, just a small clarification, it says 7 pairs. Sometimes the literal translation says 7 sevens, but it says 7 pairs of all clean animals. So it's not just 2 by 2. The 2 by 2 is only when it comes to unclean animals. And obviously Noah knew the difference, even though we find out about the clean and unclean animals only later in Leviticus chapter 11. And the clean animals, the unclean animals would be animals like pigs and horses and dogs and cats and all those kind of animals. Clean animals, like chicken and all the animals that we are allowed to consume. Now, even though in Colossians 2:16 it says that we don't have to necessarily follow all those rules, many people have admitted, many dietitians, many nutritionists have admitted that following the clean diet, the clean animal diet that is mentioned in books like Leviticus, actually helps a person to live longer and won't contribute to the bad type of cholesterol. So I think there's some wisdom in that. God knew about all that. He revealed it to Noah about what is clean, what is unclean. He gives him some slightly different instructions. So careful reading, you'll know that it's 7 pairs of clean animals. And he gives him these instructions. And now the thing is, like, how did these animals come? I mentioned briefly last time. I think that it would have no doubt been miraculous. We also saw that there's a chance that they may not have been scattered all over the earth, because the earth had very moderate temperatures all around. So it was warm climate. You can find this out. There is some evidence of all different kinds of fossils in the same area. So all the animals might have been very close by. And there's a very good chance, although we can't be certain of this, that at that time there weren't divisions in the land. It might have been one huge continent, and so they had no problem when it came to migration or headed. They would not had a problem when it comes to making that journey towards the ark. But I think just like many animals, many birds have this migratory instinct built in, and they're able to sense imminent danger. Like when the tsunami came in 2004, there's also the story of all these animals, or these elk, I think, escaping this one mountain called Mount Helens just before the volcano erupted. They have the sense where they can decipher or figure out when something dangerous is about to occur. And the same thing even Jesus says, actually, just comes to mind about the end of days, about how animals will start reacting. They'll sense that something is going to happen, that the tribulation period is going to begin. They have it built in within themselves. Dogs, cats, animals, all of them are able to sense a danger and if it's imminent. And so God could have easily programmed, if He's the one who created each one of them, their minds, their brains, their senses, He could have easily programmed within them the ones that needed to go towards the ark. I don't think Noah would have gone around, searching and dragging the animals. But I think they would have miraculously come towards the ark. And then in verses 4, it says, "For in 7 days I will send rain on the earth 40 days and 40 nights, and every living thing that I have made I will blot out from the face of the ground." So even over here, God still waits 7 days. He's not going to immediately send, which I think just points to his long suffering and points to the fact that he's patient and that he keeps giving people chances. If there were people around Noah at that time, and the text doesn't say anything about that, but if you imagine that there were still people who saw the completed ark, there were still 7 days for them to repent and to believe in God, and yet none of them repented. But God is patient, God is long suffering. So 7 more days, and then He sends the rain for 40 days and 40 nights, and He says everything will be blotted out. The word there is completely obliterated. And Noah did all that the Lord commanded him. So just that affirmation regarding Noah's obedience. He did everything that God commanded down to a T. He followed all the instructions. I'm reminded of that good old song which says, "Trust and obey, for there is no other way to be happy in Jesus but to trust and obey." So he obeyed all the instructions that God gave him, and the author Moses, who we believe is Moses, has documented that. So we don't have to understand everything about the planet or everything about God, everything about the Trinity in order to believe Him, because God's knowledge is so vast that if He tries and explains why He does everything the way He did it, or how He created the universe, all the details, then we simply will not understand. It'll be something like me standing with a teacup and he pours the entire ocean, the oceans of the world. I might get the quantity of a teacup, whatever I am able to hold. That is my intellectual capacity. But there's so much. He's so vast when it comes to his wisdom, and he knows everything. So there are many things that we must, in our humility, accept. I don't understand everything that God did in the Bible, but if He chose to do it a certain way, then I will accept it by faith. So even that's just, I guess, a word of caution when it comes to the field of apologetics. Yes, there are brilliant people out there who can explain so much and are so knowledgeable, but even they will not be able to explain everything. Even they at some point will be stumped when somebody asks them something. And that's because we're trying to explain a God who is unfathomable, at least this side of eternity. We'll read on verses 6 to 9. This is talking, the first part is the faith that Noah had. It talks about how he was the only righteous one with his family. Now we're going to read about his family getting onto the boat or the barge. Verses 6 clearly tells us Noah was 600 years old when the flood of the waters came upon the earth. And Noah and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives went into the ark to escape the waters of the flood. Of the clean animals and of the animals that are not clean, and of the birds and of everything that creeps on the ground, 2 and 2, male and female, went into the ark with Noah as God commanded Noah. And after 7 days, the waters of the flood came upon the earth. Just like God said, God is somebody who keeps His promise. If He says it, it will happen. He's not a man that He should lie. And so exactly like He said, 7 days later, the flood waters came upon the earth. And when this happened, Noah was 600 years old, and he is the one who led his family into the ark. And the principle here is that Noah goes in with his family. He leads from the front, and then the animals come. When I was reading this, what I thought about is how sometimes when you go on an aircraft and they say, in case of an emergency, put on your mask, that mask will drop down, put on your own mask first, and then help the toddler, the infant who's beside you, or somebody who's not capable of putting on that mask, somebody who's struggling to put on that mask. And the reason is because it's very simple. The reason is, if you try to help them first, even though that seems like the right thing to do, like help them first, they're struggling to breathe. What's the point if you don't have ample oxygen, and in those few precious seconds you lose consciousness and you're not able to help them? Neither are you able to help yourself, which is why they give this very common sense instruction: first you put it on, first you be in a position to help others, then you can help the toddler or the person who's struggling with their oxygen mask. And I think it's a simple principle over there, because here Noah goes in first to the ark and then everybody else follows. And I think the principle is that it's not enough to just sit in church. It's not enough to, just sing a few hymns or take communion or baptism. We need to enter the rest that Jesus Christ himself has provided through the cross. And so we have to take that step of faith. Noah took that step of faith. He wasn't he yes, he assembled the whole ark. He brought the pit. He did everything that God instructed him to do throughout those years, as we discussed, between 55 75 years, how many ever years it took him to build that ark. But that was not enough. It wasn't enough to stand outside the ark and admire the work that he had done, as some men like to stand and admire their vehicles for a few minutes. It wasn't enough to admire the ark. He had to take that step of faith and get into the ark. And we have to, take that step. There is that step of faith always. Not enough to have intellectual facts and knowledge. You have to take that step of faith and say, yes, Lord, I believe and I surrender and trust in the rest that Christ is able to provide for each one of us. And so he led from the front. The animals all followed. And we don't have to, because, again, I'm reminded of that. I mentioned the story before about the time I thought that I was about to minister to this younger guy, and then I thought I'd be very open with him, and so I shared with him, saying, "See, listen, we all struggle. I have my own struggle," because I wanted him to feel comfortable in that moment, and I thought, me being candid would help him open up. But when I was sharing, if you remember, he said, "Okay, it looks like you have a lot of problems. Let me pray for you." The whole purpose of that meeting, that interaction that I was having with him, is that I wanted to pray for him and I wanted him to accept Jesus in the gospel. But he sort of put on this facade, because many of us hide behind that thing, like, oh, we hide behind all these pseudo concerns that we have about the world. And, the world is so messed up. People are so sinful. But the whole point is, you take care of yourself first. Put on the mask yourself first. Only then you'll be in a position to take care of others. Because at the end of the day, you're the only one, I'm the only one who will stand and give account for our own lives. We don't have to give account for anybody else's life. We have to only stand in judgment for our own lives. And so put on the oxygen mask first. And it's the same thing even with, in a very practical sense in life today, for caregivers and for anybody who looks to help others, whether it's at home in a very practical way, whether it's me preaching the word. First, I must be filled with the word. First, I must be ministered to by the word. First, you must be full of the word. Only then can we be an example to others. And Noah models that, I think, in these few verses by going into the ark first, by carrying out the instructions, by taking that step of faith. So let's move on to a couple of verses 7 verses 7 and 8. Let me see if I read it. Verses 7 and 8 says that Noah and his sons and his wife went into the ark to escape the waters of the flood of the clean animals. Okay, I read that part. Just want to touch briefly on verses 10. After 7 days, like God said, the waters of the flood came upon the earth. The reason that this one phrase, came upon the earth, that is, it covered the entire earth. In very plain terms, it was a global flood. The reason I'm emphasizing that fact is because many people, including pastors, theologians today, want to deny that fact, that it was a global flood. They want to say it was a local flood that just happened in one region, because of a lot of things that science says, and they feel a little embarrassed to admit that maybe there are some things that are contradictory between science and the biblical account. But the truth is, if this was not a global flood, then Moses used some very misleading language. If you read all the descriptions that he gives, he says it came upon the entire earth. Jesus himself in the New Testament, he said it'll be like the days of Noah, and he talks about it he talks about Noah as a real person. It's not an allegory, or he's not talking about like some that we should use some metaphorical interpretation. It's a real account, it's a real historical person, and it was a global flood. And some of the things that I noted is that some of the lines of evidence that we have that it was in fact a global flood is because sometimes you'll find fossils of sea creatures even on high mountains. For example, you find some kind of shellfish even in the Himalayas, that range of mountains that we have in North India and in Nepal. So, the fossils being found on such mountains can only be explained by a global flood that covered the entire earth and all the mountains, which is what it says over here. And also, there are many fossils that are well preserved and that's only possible if the layers of sediment, the strata of sediment, cover the animals very quickly, very rapidly. Otherwise, if they died and there were some parts that were exposed or it took years, then there would be decay. There would be scavengers that came and fed on the cadavers or the dead bodies of all these animals. But it was something that happened very rapidly because it's something that when the waters burst forth, when the waters came down, it's something that eroded all the land and shifted, caused a lot of geographical changes. And again, that's the third thing that I learned about this. It says that there were rapidly deposited sediment layers of strata. That is, all these layers. You have different rock formations, and this is spread all across the globe. For instance, I noted that there's something called Tapiet sandstone and the Redwall limestone of the Grand Canyon. So it should be, if there was no global flood, it should only be traced in a certain area. But it's spread all over US and into Canada. And then you have something called the chalk beds of England, which is spread all over. This is that white layer. If you go to England, you'll see some of the beaches have these white layers of sand, of sediment. It's spread all over Europe. It's spread all over Middle East, Australia, US again. So how did all these layers of sand spread all over? The most plausible explanation is a global flood. And of course, if you look at the New Testament, there are some exceptions, but almost all of the books, whenever they reference, a lot of the New Testament quotes the Old Testament, especially the book of Genesis, chapters 1 to 11, they treat it like a literal account of things. They don't treat it as a metaphor or allegory. So that is why we must understand this to be a global flood, something that really happened, something that covered the whole thing, not try to explain it away, because this is the word of God and we believe that every part of it is true, unless of course otherwise written. Like, there are some times when metaphorical language, but if the context indicates that it's literal, then it is literal. So we read on over here, verses 11 and 12. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, on the 17th day of the month, on that day all the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of the heavens were opened. If you notice this verses 11, there's some extensive detail that is mentioned, because Moses wants us to know this is a very accurate record, and he's not just making it up or copying it from somewhere. This is a very, very exact account. The exact year of 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, on the 17th day, that's when the fountains of the earth burst forth and the windows of heaven. See, I just gave an example of where it's so obvious. When I read windows of heaven, I understand it's not a literal window of heaven that opened and some water fell out. We know that this should be understood in a metaphorical sense. It's poetic language, the windows of heaven. So what is literal is quite obvious, and what is non-literal is quite obvious just by a simple reading. And so we must understand the Bible literally, grammatically, as we read it, and that's how we should interpret it. So burst forth, the windows of heaven were open, and rain fell upon the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. So 40 days, 40 nights, rain fell upon it. On the very same day, Noah and his sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and Noah's wife, and the three wives of his sons with them entered the ark, they and every beast according to its kind, and all the livestock according to their kinds, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth according to its kind, and every bird according to its kind, every winged creature. They went into the ark with Noah, two and two of all flesh, in which there was the breath of life. And those that entered, male and female, of all flesh, went in as God commanded him. And I like this last phrase of verses 16. And the Lord shut him in, and the Lord closed the door, and the Lord sealed them inside. And before I get into that phrase, if you notice in verses 16, it says, as God commanded him. At the very end of verses 16, it says, and as God commanded him, and then there's a change. It says, and the Lord shut him up. Sometimes we just glance over these things. First, it's using the word Elohim, and then it's using the word Yahweh, which basically says the all-powerful God, the all-sufficient God was in control, and he got them all in. He commanded them, and then he shut them in. I like that last phrase, shut him in, because it's God who did the closing of the ark. He did everything. Noah, constructed the ark. He might have sent the animals, and the animals would have gathered there, but he might have directed them in. But God is the one who closed the ark. And here's that topic that I often visit now and then about whether salvation can be lost. There's a lot that Noah did on his part. He had to believe God. There was a lot of responsibility on his part. He had to carry out all the directives and the commandments and the instructions of God. But it is eventually God who shut the door, sealed the door of the ark, and the ark, as most of you know, is a metaphor for salvation. He was saved through the flood, and we are saved by placing our faith in God, and he is saved through the judgment. The floods came. The floods were nothing but a universal judgment of God against all the depravity and the vile nature of sin. And Noah is saved through this. The ark is nothing but a picture, a representation of salvation, and it is God who closes that door of the ark, which tells you that once you are saved, again, another picture, another pointer to the fact that it is God who preserves us, it is God who carries us. Because as somebody once said, if it was really up to me to keep my salvation, then I would lose it. And I totally concur with that sort of a sentiment. If it was up to me to maintain my salvation, I would definitely lose it. But I'm grateful for a God who keeps me, who preserves me. Yes, a lot of responsibility. Yes, work out my fear with salvation and fear and trembling, but it is God who closes the door. The God who began a good work is faithful to bring it to completion until that day of Jesus Christ. So Spurgeon says this. He says, Noah might have fallen many times inside the ark, but he never once fell outside the ark. Many times as he was walking around, because there's this term called sea legs. And people ask, like, once you start sailing, have you got your sea legs? Which is basically just a term describing how do you have the ability to balance yourself, because there's always that constant rocking of the boat due to the waves. So are you able to balance yourself? The ability to learn how to balance while being on the sea. So they say, do you have your sea legs? So actually, I read an article of this one man who, after he retired, he was in business or something. He was a finance officer. Once he retired, he decided he wants to start living the rest of his life on cruise ships. And so for 20 years, he lived on cruise ships, spent more than 9,000 nights on sleeping on cruise ships and traveling. And right now, I think he's in Royal Caribbean. He ironically has the opposite problem. He doesn't have the problem with, getting his sea legs. He has a problem when he comes on dry land, because he's not able to walk in a straight line, because he's so used to walking on the ship when it is moving, being tossed back and forth, bobbing side to side. He's used to walking on board. When he gets on land, he has trouble walking in a straight line. So Spurgeon says Noah might have fallen inside the ship, but he did not fall outside the ship. So the ship being a metaphor for salvation. Verses 17 to 20, let me read. Then what happens? The flood continued 40 days on the earth. The waters increased and bore up. That word lifted up, bore up, is the same word in Isaiah chapter 6, where Isaiah says, I saw the Lord high and lifted up. Same thing. The ark was lifted up and it rose high above the earth. High above the earth. It wasn't some small local flood. The floods covered the entire earth. It covered all the mountains. The waters prevailed. If you notice this phrase, it's going to appear about 3 times. The waters prevailed, the waters prevailed. The waters prevailed and increased greatly on the earth, and the ark floated on the face of the waters. Again, and the waters prevailed so mightily on the earth that all the high mountains under the whole heaven were covered. Again, the waters prevailed above the mountains, covering them 15 cubits deep. And all flesh died that moved on the earth, birds, livestock, beasts, all swarming, not swimming, swarming creatures that swarm on the earth, and all mankind. So when this phrase in the Hebrew, and the waters prevail, when something in the Hebrew language is repeated 3 times, they're trying to make this point. They're trying to take it to the superlative form. It's like holy, holy, holy. Or in English, we say, I think, best, or good, good, better, best. We're trying to, use superlative terms over there. So that's what, in Hebrew, it's simply a repetition. Holy, holy, holy. That means God is holy, God is holier, and He's the holiest being. So that's what's happening over here. And the waters prevail, and the waters prevail. It's an emphasis on how much the waters covered the earth. It completely submerged the entire earth. And verses 22 says, everything on the dry land in whose nostrils was the breath of life died. In 1925, there was this debate between a Christian apologist and I think he was an advocate, or he was an attorney. His name was Daniel. Clarence Daniel was the attorney, but the Christian apologist was called William Jennings Bryan, and they both were debating 1925 regarding this flood, because it's an event that's often attacked by skeptics of the faith. And basically, this attorney said, "Do you believe that the Bible is literal?" And the apologist called William said, "Yes." William Jennings said, "Yes, I believe it's a literal account." Then he said, "How could the fish have died in the flood? How could all the fish?" It says every living thing died. If he knew this verse, he fumbled a lot, and sadly, actually, he died the next day. I don't think it was a result of the debate. It just so happened this apologist died the next day. But he did not quote this verse. He gave a long speech, but he did not. He was a little stumped by his question when he said, "If it says everything died, how would the fish have died?" But it clearly says that it's only all land creatures that have died. Now, could some of the fish have died when the floods came because the springs burst open? Sure, some of them may not have survived. Some of them might have been in fresh water, and then they mixed with seawater, and they could not survive over there. Now we know that fish has to be in specific regions in order to survive. A simple example would be even you have a tank. If you keep some fish in the house, also you need a lot of instruments to ensure you keep cleaning out the water and all those things. Otherwise, the fish will eventually die, will eventually perish. So I'm sure when the floods came, there were certain fish that definitely died because, as a direct result of the floods, of being displaced. But some of them would have survived because they'd have got to pockets of water where there was fresh water or whatever. And of course, that at that time, I don't think the waters would have had the same salt content that it has right now, the oceans have right now. But I don't think that anywhere in the text, if you read carefully, it says that the fish were also destroyed. It only says that human beings were destroyed, and all the things on the land, all the animals that breathe, that have the breath of life. And that's not really, that phrase doesn't describe fish through the nostrils, breath of life through nostrils. So I don't think that the fish died, and I don't think that God, and that's how they survived. Because if Noah did not carry a tank, and Noah, we see he has this aquarium on board the ship, because how else would the fish have survived after the flood? So I don't think that all the fish died during the flood. I think they would have survived. At least some of them would have survived. So he blotted out every living thing that was on the face of the ground, man and animals and creeping things and birds of the heavens. So birds were another group. So there were three, right? So the animals on the land, the birds, and then the fish. So I don't think the fish were destroyed. They were blotted out from the earth. Only Noah was left, and those who were with him in the ark, and the waters prevailed on the earth 150 days. So for 150 days, the waters prevailed. I think Noah and his family were in the ark for about 371 days when you calculate and put all the numbers together, which was a long time to be in a boat like that, just trusting God. But they did trust God, and he eventually comes out, as we'll read later on. Many people talk about this account and they say that this Moses probably copied this Genesis account from a Babylonian epic or a Babylonian poem. And there, the hero, or the half deity, he was considered to be 2/3 divine and 1/3 human. His name was Gilgamesh. And so some because there's a very similar account when it comes to this Babylonian epic or this poem, where there are so many parallels. If you compare the two, the story of Noah and thing, there also God, but there it wasn't one singular God, it was a council of gods, little g gods, who decided to send waters upon the earth. Again, there was a guy, I written his name down. His name was Utnapishtim. Instead of Noah, the hero of that story, his name was Utnapishtim. And he was the one who was told by God, and he and his family were saved. And again, the heavens opened. His boat also had compartments. His boat also had a door. The animals came. Lot of parallels. Except his boat was not like this. This was more or like in the shape of a shoe or a shoebox. Like it was long, rectangular. But his was just a cube, which doesn't make sense according to the dimensions of this Babylonian epic. And he complained when God told him, but Noah did not complain. And there are a few discrepancies between both the accounts. They're not exactly parallel. There, the duration of the flood was about 6 days. It finally rests on Mount Nisir, but we know that in the biblical account, it rests on Mount Ararat. So few differences here and there. I think that all the evidence points to the fact that this Babylonian epic was actually copied from this Genesis flood account, if you study it carefully. Another evidence that the flood was global is, like, some people, I think James Montgomery Boyce documents that about 200 different people groups have this story of a global flood happening at some point. Like you go to different civilizations, right from whether it's Mayans, the Chinese, the Romans, the Greek, everybody talks about a universal flood. And out of that, some people have put these statistics together. They say 88% described, 88% of these 200 people groups described of a favored family being saved through the flood. So there's 88% who say there was one family. Yes, there was one family that was saved through the flood. 76% says that they survived via the means of a boat. They were survived through this. They were all on board this ship, and because of that, they survived. 95% say the sole cause of this destruction was a global flood, and 66% say that it was due to man's wickedness and sinfulness. 67% say that animals were saved too, and then 57% say that it ended on a mountain. And so you see that there is a lot of people believe in this story. Only now, these days, it is attacked by many people, by many skeptics, saying that it's not possible for a global flood like this to have happened in the past. But Jesus talks about it. Peter talks about it. All of them, the author of Hebrews, whoever he is, talks about this account of the global flood that really, really happened. They do treat it as a historical event.